Hello! In this video, we're going to talk about atoms and the parts of an atom. So what is an atom? An atom is the basic unit of matter. In other words, it's pretty much the basic building block of matter. And visually speaking, an atom looks something like this. So this is an atom. Okay, so then what's going on here? Well, notice in this drawing we basically have three types of circles. Ones which have plus signs in them, ones which have nothing in them, and ones which have minus signs in them. It turns out atoms consist of three particles: protons, neutrons, and electrons. Okay, so in my drawing here, the particles with the plus signs inside of them are protons. The particles with nothing inside of them are neutrons. And the particles with the minus sign inside of them are the electrons. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the basic facts regarding protons, neutrons, and electrons. To start, protons and neutrons are located at the center of an atom. And that agrees with what we have in our drawing here. Notice the protons and neutrons are all located at the center. In fact, they all appear to be bunched up with each other, right? Touching each other. Together, the protons and neutrons make up what we call the nucleus of the atom. So really, this region right here is the nucleus of the atom. Okay, so now let's move back up to the top and do some more notes. So the protons and neutrons are all located at the center of the atom. On the other hand, the electrons are located outside the nucleus. And that agrees with what we have in our drawing. Notice the electrons are not located anywhere near the center of the atom, right? They're all located away from the center. And yeah, that's pretty much the idea. In fact, the electrons move around the nucleus of the atom really fast, actually. And many times when you look up drawings of atoms, you'll find that they often have circular paths of the electrons around the nucleus, right? Something that looks like this. Right, so these circular paths represent the movement of the electrons around the nucleus, right? So those are some of the basic facts regarding protons, neutrons, and electrons. Now, I would like to talk about two properties of protons, neutrons, and electrons. The first being their masses, and the second being their charges. Let's start by talking about the masses. Okay, so to start, protons and neutrons have approximately the same mass. And we're going to take the notion that the mass of a proton or neutron is equal to 1 atomic mass unit. Right, and the symbol for 1 atomic mass unit is 1U. Right, that's pretty much it for the mass of a proton and a neutron. As for electrons, well, it turns out that a proton is about 2,000 times more massive than an electron. And because protons and neutrons have approximately the same mass, that means a neutron is about 2,000 times more massive than an electron. And an analogy you could use to think about this is you could think of a proton or a neutron as a bowling ball, as an electron is to a ping pong ball. So what this means is a proton or neutron is about 2,000 times more massive than an electron. just like how a bowling ball is about 2,000 times more massive than a ping pong ball. Right? That's pretty crazy if you think about it, right? Really, you could think of this atom where the center is composed of bowling balls and ping pong balls are orbiting around it. And yeah, now putting this all together, overall, most of the mass of an atom is concentrated in the nucleus. And why is that the case? Well, that's because what we have inside the nucleus is much more massive than what we have outside the nucleus, right? The protons and neutrons inside the nucleus are much more massive than the electrons outside the nucleus. And so yeah, that's pretty much it for the masses of these three particles. Now, let's talk about another property, the charges of these three particles. Okay, so to start, protons have a positive charge. And we'll typically say it has a +1 charge. Now, neutrons have 0 charge. Another way of putting this is we say that they're neutral. And electrons have a negative charge. And we'll typically say that they have a -1 charge. And so, as you can see, protons positive, neutrons neutral, electrons negative. And that reflects why I put a plus sign with protons and a minus sign with the electrons. Right, it has to do with what their charges are. Now, putting this all together, what is the overall charge of the nucleus? It turns out the overall charge of the nucleus is positive. Okay, but why is this true? Well, really, when we say overall charge, we mean the total charge of all protons and all neutrons in the nucleus. So if we add up the charges of all protons in the nucleus, then in this case we have a total of 6 protons. Each proton has a +1 charge, so overall we have a +6 charge for all protons in the nucleus. And if we add up the charges of all the neutrons, well, each neutron has 0 charge. So when we add up the charges of all the neutrons, we get 0. So if we add up the total charges of all protons and all neutrons, we overall get a +6 charge, right? So really, we get a positive charge. And so yeah, that's pretty much the idea. So this is pretty much what you need to know when it comes to the charges of these three particles. Now, there is actually one more thing I would like to talk about, and this is actually a key idea of an atom. An atom has an equal number of protons and electrons. And this is true in what we drew here. If we count the total number of protons, we see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 protons. And if we count the total number of electrons, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 electrons. So as you can see, we have an equal number of protons and electrons. It's a key idea about atoms. And another way of putting this is we say that atoms are electrically neutral. Right, what this really means is if we add up the total amount of charge of everything in an atom, the total charge is 0. So if we add the total charges of all protons, neutrons, and electrons in an atom, we should get 0. Well, let's see. The total charges of all protons is +6 because we have a total of 6 protons. And each proton has a +1 charge. So really, we have a total charge of +6 coming from the protons. As for the total charge of all the neutrons, well, we know that neutrons have 0 charge. So the total charges of all the neutrons is 0. And lastly, the total charges of all the electrons is going to be -6 because we know that each electron has a -1 charge. because we have a total of 6 electrons, that means we have a total of -6 charge coming from the electrons. And so if we add this all together, we get a total charge in the atom of 0. So the total charge of all particles in the atom are 0. And that's exactly what we mean when we say atoms are electrically neutral. This is pretty much all I would like to talk about in this video. And so yeah, that's pretty much it.